rises. Ganon's magic waxes strongest now. The monsters who run the land, their souls have returned to them. They've arisen.
Hi, and hope you're having a great day, and thanks for watching this video. There's no doubt it's an exciting time to be a Zelda fan. With the release of Skyward Sword HD, and more information coming to light regarding the sequel to Breath of the Wild, there's never been a better time to revisit the land of Hyrule and its many mysteries, many of which remain unsolved. Recently, we were treated to a second trailer for the proposed Breath of the Wild 2 game, suggesting a release date in 2022. The trailer followed up the initial reveal from Nintendo way back in 2019 when the first trailer released, indicating that a sequel was in development. This first trailer presented fans with a dark theme filled with mysterious transitions and fast-paced edits that left enthusiasts worldwide speculating on the potential direction of the hotly anticipated sequel. And whilst the first trailer kept a thematic tone, confining its imagery to a tight section of the overall narrative, the more recent trailer released at E3 this year heightened the sense of duality the series has come to be known for by including brighter gameplay segments and more colourful imagery. One of the most significant aspects to this reveal was the announcement that gameplay for Breath of the Wild 2 would include exploration in the skies. The imagery of the protagonist diving from the heavens through the clouds with floating islands adorning the backdrop was a familiar sight to many longtime fans. This scene almost mirrored the hook for the release of the divisive origin story in The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. In my first video covering the potential of a playable Zelda in Breath of the Wild 2, I commented on the notion that the release of Skyward Sword, along with an anthology of Zelda lore known as the Goddess Collection, signalled a change in the direction of the franchise, with the somewhat structured plan to the world being considered and evidenced in the releases that would follow. It's no surprise then that many have noticed common themes arising between Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild. But is there more that we can find in the detail, secrets hidden in the past, that might shine a light on the future of Breath of the Wild 2? I believe there is, so today, please join me as I discuss some mysterious clues that show a connection to Breath of the Wild and its upcoming sequel. Number 1. The Rito. The Rito are a bird-like race who first appeared in the Wind Waker with their village located on Dragon Roost Island. The Legend of Zelda Encyclopedia describes them as bird-like Hyruleans, with roots linking them to the Zora from Ocarina of Time, who evolved to the Rito following the Great Flood, which submerged Hyrule under the sea in the adult timeline. The book goes on to state that the Rito are not born with the ability to fly, and that only when they have proven themselves as adults can they receive a scale from their guardian deity Velu and obtain their wings. This explanation of the origins of the Rito have left more than a few enthusiasts puzzled, and for obvious reason. Why a waterbound tribe like the Zora, perfectly suited for life in a world dominated by a vast expansive ocean, would evolve into a bird-like form where the ability to fly is not guaranteed, seems a little strange. Whilst it can be argued that the Zora in Ocarina of Time survived in a freshwater environment, evolving to adapt to seawater would seem more in line with expectations, particularly when we consider this seems to be the case for the Zora we see in Majora's Mask. This piece of information has also been a critical element in timeline placement when it comes to debates surrounding Breath of the Wild, with many pointing to the inclusion of the Rito in this new version of Hyrule as evidence of a placement in the adult timeline due to this particular connection. If there was one topic amongst the Zelda community that stirs fear into the hearts of any enthusiast, it would be the Zelda timeline. So for this reason, I won't be entering into that part of the debate for this particular theory. When Breath of the Wild was released in 2017, a new entry in the Zelda Written Chronicles was released, dubbed creating a champion for Western audiences. This particular tome describes the Rito different from those we've seen in prior versions. It explains how they have powerful winged arms, which has helped them earn the reputation as rulers of the sky. Developer notes on page 129 from artist Hirohito Shinoda confirm the appearance has changed dramatically to emphasise their unique characteristics as a race. Page 130 goes even further, stating that the Rito are a combination of the traits of birds and Hylians, and that they prefer to eat meat or fish, similar to what you would see in typical birds of prey. This description is contrary to that provided in the Rito we see in The Wind Waker, and makes no reference to a lineage of evolution from the Zora. The Rito we see in-game during Breath of the Wild are capable of flight soon after birth, as evidenced in the Shrine Quest recital at Warbler's Nest. There is no Valoo present in the game either, suggesting that the power of flight is a characteristic of this incarnation of the Rito, as opposed to something that they earn, as we see in the Wind Waker. Creating a champion almost appears to go out of its way to distance itself from the previous iteration, stating clearly that the Rito are a mix of bird-like and Hylian features. So, if this iteration of the Rito we see in Breath of the Wild is not the same as those we've seen in the Wind Waker, then where did this incarnation of the Rito hail from? To help answer this question, we need only look to Skyward Sword and the concept art provided for that game. Hyrule Historia, the first book in the Goddess series, was released in 2011 and coincided with the 25th anniversary of the Legend of Zelda series, as well as the release of Skyward Sword. In the concept art for the inhabitants of Skyloft, artists make reference to how they approach the style of the Hylian inhabitants of this floating haven. In particular, they describe how they assigned bird-like characteristics to each individual, with some specific examples fairly noticeable within the game. A quote is provided from designer Hirono, which states, "In the beginning it was decided that all residents of Skyloft would be modelled after birds. That's where the idea to give Henya a rooster's body came from. Groose's pointy hairstyle was inspired by a rooster's comb, and Owlin and Horwell's designs were based on the Rito tribe from the Wind Waker." Chronologically speaking, Skyward Sword was released after the Wind Waker, well and truly after the decision had been made to link the Rito from the aforementioned game to the Zora in Ocarina of Time. If the timing of these decisions and odd connections has you confused, well then you wouldn't be alone. But maybe I can shed some light on what the developers intended with this design choice in Skyward Sword. By creating a clear distinction in the bird-like traits of the Hylians in Skyward Sword, a race who are coupled with the giant Loftwings during this era, I believe the developers were creating an alternative proposition to the evolution of the Rito that we see appear in Breath of the Wild. The end of Skyward Sword indicates that Zelda and Link have chosen to live on the surface of Hyrule, but it doesn't confirm the choices of all the inhabitants in Skyloft, nor what happens to Skyloft itself. In this scenario, it becomes reasonable to assume that if some of the Hylians chose to stay in Skyloft, high above the clouds, that the natural course of evolution already apparent in the bird-like features some of them possessed would continue. That eventually these Hylians might have evolved into bird-like Hylians, such as the Rito we see in Breath of the Wild. In fact, the Rito crest itself bears a striking resemblance to a combination of the top of the Hylian crest, the bird claw worn by Gaepora, and the bottom of the crest from Kurami. Going further, this concept would explain how the Rito came to exist in the same Hyrule that contains the race of Zora, a fact that has been the source of much speculation and debate since the game released. But could it mean more? Could the Rito have a heritage dating back to the times of Skyloft in Skyward Sword, which translates to a connection to the Sky Islands that we see in the trailer for Breath of the Wild 2. There is very little information provided in relation to the backstory of some of the races we see in Breath of the Wild, and this connection would be a great way to further flesh out this side of the narrative, further uniting the inhabitants of Hyrule in their shared past and impending future. Whilst this is only theoretical, this new view of the Rito and how they fit into the wider history of Hyrule is an exciting idea, and one I would personally love to see explored more in the sequel. Number 2, the Blood Moon. One of the craziest things to happen to players not expecting it in the game is their experience when they encounter their first Blood Moon. The skies, whilst already dark, seem to take on a more sinister edge. Like the calm before the storm, the feeling that washes over the player is a sense of foreboding, a deep dread building as slowly flickers of blood-soaked embers cross your path, building in intensity with every second that passes. With the audio of the game complementing the ominous mood perfectly, the uneasiness builds to a crescendo until the screen is almost completely drenched in a crimson doom. The Blood Moon is rising.
Link! Be on your guard. Ganon's power grows. It rises to its peak under the hour of the blood moon. By its glow, the aimless spirits of monsters slain in the name of the light return to flesh. Link, please be careful.
It's here that the player learns of the cycle prompted by the Blood Moon, the rebirth of slain enemies, and the sudden realization that there is no hiding from the calamity. With all dramatics aside, it's a great mechanic that achieves numerous ends. Aside from the seemingly random nature and involvement in Shrine Quest, the Blood Moon serves a purpose in keeping the world stocked with challenges as the player progresses, slowly increasing difficulty in the form of reborn enemies with new, stronger capabilities, and on occasion, different drops for the player as well. Some 4 years on, the Blood Moon has almost petered out of consciousness, much like the effects slowly drift off in-game. Players becoming more accustomed to the event simply move on without taking too much notice. So you might find it surprising then to realise that an object appearing similar to the Blood Moon appears in concept art for the sealed incarnation of the original Demon King demise, known as the Imprisoned. Whilst there are a few renders of the Imprisoned, the one relating specifically to his third form is set in front of what can only be described as an image eerily similar to that of the Blood Moon we see in Breath of the Wild. The depiction in Hyrule Historia goes even deeper, with a focus on the scales and commentary explaining that the red layer is extremely important to the look of the character. But whilst it might be easy to simply write this one off, as we did not see Demise in Breath of the Wild, we have seen glimpses in the trailer of a new antagonist. With all good reasoning and based on the prominent Gerudo symbols, this corpse-like being appears to be Ganondorf, who, in the lore of the Legend of Zelda, is readily inferred to be the reincarnation of the Demon King Demise, down to his crimson hair representing the flames we see coming from the head of Demise. But the connections don't end there. In Skyward Sword, Fi shares some interesting dialogue about Demise. Specifically, she states, "This eternal being has conquered time itself. It is the source of all monsters. According to tales passed down through generations, it appears differently in each epoch and to each person who lays eyes on it." Now, a being that has conquered time itself is the source of all monsters, who can appear different depending on the era and the individual who perceives them, and is also implied to be none other than Ganondorf himself. Strange, huh? Could it be possible that Demise, the source of the curse who bound his malice and hatred to the chosen hero and the reincarnation of the goddess Hylia, is the driving source behind the Blood Moon events we see in Breath of the Wild? And if so, what could this mean in the sequel? I've wondered about this ever since the end of Breath of the Wild, whether the Blood Moon would feature in a sequel or title in the future. If it was tied to the calamity as a direct consequence of that event, or if it was something more, perhaps tied to the source of the calamity. The occurrences are alleged to have been increasing and even seemingly having an effect on some of the characters that you meet in game. For example, there's a character you can find in Dueling Peaks Stable named Hino, a regular looking chap with a fascination surrounding the Blood Moon phenomenon. Aside from being more than happy to tell Link all about the topic, Hino can also provide the player information on the moon for that particular night. Moreover, Hino will share a specific line warning the player to expect a blood moon when it's on the horizon. He says, "I'm getting that feeling again. Something is going to happen tonight. I can taste it. Tonight is the blood moon, at last." Even more strange is what happens if Link tries to interact with Hino during one of these events. In what is one of the most bizarre interactions of the game, Hino will begin acting irrationally, running around in a circle like an unhinged madman, spouting lines such as, "Here it comes, blood, it's so red, so gloriously red, my blood, it's boiling," and "Arise, monsters." What is fascinating about this is that Hino makes no mention of the blood moon being caused by the calamity, and doesn't seem to make any connection with it. He simply states that whenever the clock strikes midnight on unlucky nights, the sky turns blood red. That's the blood moon, he says. And when that happens, monsters come back to life, no matter how many times you've defeated them. It's happened for so long now that no one really pays it any mind, but I have no plans to give up on my research. Many point to the calamity as the driver of the blood moon. Zelda is a prime example, who announced Ganon's power growing during this particular event. But she simply states that Ganon's power grows under the blood moon, peaking during the event. We see the same effect on monsters who are essentially reincarnated during a blood moon, as well as Hino, who turns into a can and a half of crazy during this particular event. Delving further, more information can be found in Creating a Champion, which provides a direct connection between the blood moon and the calamity. It cites specifically that Calamity Ganon is actively being suppressed by Princess Zelda. Its power still bleeds out into Hyrule and occasionally causes a phenomenon known as Night of the Red Moon, or simply the Blood Moon. Ganon's malice stains the sky a deep red, and the monsters that Link has slain return. Any effort Link puts into reclaiming a territory from the monsters is an exercise in futility. Their forces will inevitably return. In order to ensure that the people of Hyrule are safe, the source of evil, Calamity Ganon, must be defeated. What is interesting about this description is where it specifically highlights the source of evil as the key, but refers to Calamity Ganon. Considering Breath of the Wild was focused on Calamity Ganon as the primary antagonist, this is not surprising, but it does provide a clue as to what we might be facing in the sequel. If the source is not the manifestation of Ganon's hatred, the boss we see in the first title, then it's much more likely this description is referring to the mummified remains of the Gerudo King we see in the trailer for the sequel, spewing forth concentrated malice. It would make sense that this concept art provides a clue to the connection between demise and the malice, including the blood moon. And if we refer back to the quote from Fi, creation of the goddess Hylia herself, this eternal being has conquered time itself and is the source of all monsters. It is only logical then for us to see how Demise's curse still affects the world, whether this be through his reincarnated form of Ganondorf, the Blood Moon, or the driving hatred and malice that has been corrupting the world of Breath of the Wild and likely to play a huge role in the sequel. Number 3. The Torri Gates. Found within the same concept art for Skyward Sword is the illustrative work surrounding the sealed grounds which house the imprisoned on the surface. The particular section of note is the same area where the statue of the goddess Hylia comes to rest following Link's wish on the Triforce. In the concept art, the spiral-like pattern of the area housing the imprisoned is explained from a mechanic standpoint as a way for the player to be able to see his foe during the multiple encounters during the game. Among the concepts for how these battles might work within the environment, one particular idea points to the utilization of impediment gates. The translation from the Japanese text states impediment gates, gates that act as impediments for the boss. The big boss destroys them. It's like a Japanese Torri Gate, and there will be several along the lowest path. Whilst described and featured as part of the concept art for the game, these Torri Gates were not realised in the final design and what the player actually experiences during the event. Structures appear in the drawings, though, to be made of a stone-like material, formed by large slabs in a brick-like structure, which bears more than a passing resemblance to another interesting structure being discussed at length in the trailer for Breath of the Wild 2. When we see the gameplay sections involving the Sky Islands during the trailer, almost all of the islands visible appear to have a stone-like Torri Gate, usually found adorning the edge of each landmass. Could the Torri Gates referred to in the concept art for Skyward Sword signify a connection to what we see in the sequel? Well, a fair argument against this could be the incorporation of certain themes and motifs spanning across the games already. For example, Breath of the Wild's art director, Satoru Takizawa, revealed that the general art design of the assorted Sheikah technology was inspired by the Jomon period of Japanese history, which Takizawa says is an era few are familiar with. Reviewing the inspirations for the core designs in the game, the Guardians seem to be clearly inspired by an upside-down Jomon pot, but canny players will likely be familiar with this shape already, with a similar motif being present in the Lanayru province in Skyward Sword. This shot almost looks like a scene out of Breath of the Wild, minus a few legs, claws, and life-threatening lasers. Whilst this could simply be coincidental in nature, the use of Torri Gates in the concept art surrounding the sealed grounds, and specifically with the intention of impeding a boss character, may hint at a possible connection to Torri Gates we see in the trailer for Breath of the Wild 2. Of note, the build of the Torri Gates using stone blocks is also unique to each section, further strengthening this connection. The other notable use of Torri Gates in Breath of the Wild can be seen in the entry points to Kakariko Village. As I'm not an expert, I'll refer to an article from Architecture of Zelda, an amazing site created by Talbot, which I highly recommend, and I'll put the link in the description. Talbot comments, two principal paths into Kakariko Village are each marked by two main Torri. These gates, instead of having two main posts, have four, and these posts are square in shape, not circular, creating a distinct Torri of the Sheikah. And while each set of two posts has a large extending lintel, as in traditional Torri design, there is only one shared crossbeam uniting the structure in its centre, which is further buttressed by three similar wooden beams. Two curved beams unite the structure at its top, carrying red cloth as symbolic drapery. But the most notable difference is the triangular beam that dominates the gate, almost like an empty gable of a roof. Thus far, I have not found another Torri with this distinctive design, which shows a large departure from tradition in Sheikah design, solidifying their unique cultural milieu. At its topmost point, this beam bears an open eye of polished metal, creating a watchful feeling on the path. Red ropes wind around the bottom of each post, echoing the red of the cloth above, and from the lintels and crossbeams are hung four pennants, three with the eye of the Sheikah, and one with an unexplained symbol, a triangle, floating above fading lines. The site also lends a quote from Kato, one of the Sheikah found in the village. We of the Sheikah tribe have long been heralded as people of great wisdom. Our technology became the key to sealing Ganon away during the Great Calamity some 10,000 years ago, and at one point our technology was praised as the power of the gods. But eventually the people turned on it, turned on us. Our creations came to be viewed as a threat to the kingdom. The Sheikah became outcasts, forced into exile. Some, like us, chose to cast off our technological advances and strove to live normal lives. The Sky Islands we see in the second trailer for Breath of the Wild 2 appear to be beyond a natural phenomena, and the closest comparison made to the designs and formations that comprise these Sky Islands is that seen in the shrine challenges presented in Breath of the Wild. With these Torri Gates, we have connections to the Sheikah yet again, that also predate the ancient time in Skyward Sword, with concept art suggesting stone Torri Gates might have been employed in the sealing grounds to hold the imprisoned form of Demise. This area was specifically watched over by Impa of the Sheikah, who had been serving the goddess Hylia directly. Whilst a topic for another video, I found myself wondering for some time where the rest of the mysterious Sheikah tribe are, both prior to and during the events of Skyward Sword. The term tribe has connotations of a group, implies that there was more Sheikah around this time other than Impa. We see no evidence of them on the surface world during the events of Skyward Sword, other than the remnants left behind, for example the Gossip Stones. Could it be possible that when the Hylians were raised to the Sky Islands during the conflict between Demise and Hylia, that the Sheikah also created a life high above the clouds to sustain their existence beyond the battle, ensuring that they had ongoing protection in place for Hylia and her reincarnated form, that of the Princess Zelda? We know their technical and scientific abilities were extremely advanced, so much in fact that they were banished by the very royal family they were protecting some 10,000 years ago. We never really get an answer to a few mysteries surrounding the Sheikah in Breath of the Wild, including the large telescopes present on the ancient tech labs in Hateno and Akala, or the constellation markings which adorn nearly all Sheikah architecture. Had this tribe, mysterious and ancient, who act as the scribes of a history long forgotten, built a civilization above the cloud barrier that has remained hidden to this day? The possibility becomes more plausible when we consider the City in the Sky and the Oka who appeared in Twilight Princess. Again, another ancient civilization who were advanced in magic and built a civilization above the clouds in the time before the Hylians. It seems odd that records dating back to this time are notably incomplete, especially considering the advanced level of the Sheikah tribe and their intimate relationship with the goddess and her reincarnation. The Torri Gates found in the concept art for Skyward Sword adds another connection between this ancient tribe, the origin of the cycle, and events we are likely to see play out in Breath of the Wild 2. So what do you think? Can you see some direct connections in the concept art for Skyward Sword and what we've seen so far in the trailers for Breath of the Wild 2? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave your views in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please take the time to leave a like and subscribe. I'm still very new to this whole platform, and it would be great to know if you'd like to see more of this type of content. As always, thanks for being amazing, and see you next time.